In this video, I'll give you tips and tricks on how to improve your reporting techniques. Before we begin, I want to make sure you're aware that when filming inside a private establishment, you'll need to get permission to film from the owner or the manager of that establishment. Generally speaking, however, filming in a public place is acceptable, and filming people in a public place is also acceptable. However, do not rely on my information as the definitive rule. Check the law in your area to see what you can and can't film. One of the most important things a reporter needs to be able to do is find a story. Without a potential story, there's nothing to report on. As a citizen journalist, you'll rely on different methods than professional journalists for finding your stories. There are a number of potential sources out there that should be accessible to you. Your hometown has a number of places where you can go for some interesting stories. Your local police station may have information on recent crimes or cases, as well as recent arrests they may have made. The local courthouse might also have some interesting material for you on recent cases or disputes that were handled there. You can also sit in on certain cases as well. Your local government is a great place to find important stories, especially ones that are relevant to your community. Sit in on any public sessions that they have available to provide insight to your viewers about what their elected officials are doing behind the scenes. Schools also provide a lot of potential material for stories. High schools, middle schools, and elementary schools have school board meetings, the details of which can be very important to the local community. Colleges can have important speakers on campus, public lectures by professors, or important public events or demonstrations. Colleges and high schools also have sports teams, which are followed by the local community. Speaking of sports, you may also want to see if there are any professional sports teams, major league or minor league, in your area. Coverage of these teams will be of great interest to local sports fans. Finally, local arts centers often have a lot going on that you can cover. You can write reviews of movie premieres, art galleries, theater performances, and concerts that are all easily accessible. Stories that have already been covered by other reporters can also provide for some interesting topics. Depending on the subject, you may be able to provide additional information. One way is to provide a follow-up of a story. For example, if there was a story about how police were increasing their presence in a certain area to fight crime, you might want to check back a month or two later and see how the crime rate has changed in that area, or in other nearby areas. This is not repeating the same old information, rather it is expanding on it. You can also provide an alternate angle for an existing story. Take a look at an existing story from a different perspective. For example, if there was a story about a large company opening a factory in your area, you can provide an alternate angle by taking a look at how it will affect local employment rates. As a citizen journalist, you don't have to answer to newsroom deadlines about when you have to have your footage in. At the same time, news is more valuable the earlier it's released, and a story about local elections may not be that interesting to viewers if you finish and release it 3 months later. Of course, some stories that are more in-depth can be released months after the initial story breaks. When you should release your story really depends on how much information you have to process and how time-sensitive the story is. Ideally, you should be able to shoot, write, edit, and produce one story within the space of 1 day, starting at 9, ending at 5. That's what professional journalists are able to do to provide viewers with breaking news. However, you might not have that sort of time to devote to journalism. When you're starting out, try to aim for producing stories within a week, and work your way up to completing a story within 8 hours of total work time. This can be made easier by prioritizing your shooting schedule. Make sure to devote a certain amount of time to shooting when you go out to collect footage. Start by focusing on getting the basic shots that you know you'll need, and then finish by collecting extra footage that you think you might be able to use. You don't want to undershoot, but you don't want to overshoot either. You can also save time shooting by coming prepared with enough memory so that you don't have to go home in the middle of a shoot. Transportation can take up a lot of valuable time. When interviewing your subjects, follow a few simple tips to make sure you get a good interview. Set a relaxed tone. Be friendly and conversational to your interviewee. If your subject is comfortable with you, they'll talk more freely. Make sure your interviewee says their full name on camera.
John Student.
And have them spell it out.
Johnstudent.
Also, have them state their position, if applicable.
I'm a student at Dartmouth College.
This is useful when writing the story out later or when creating the lower thirds. Sometimes certain interviewees might answer questions in a way that might be hard to understand for the audience. For example, if you ask a question such as, "Where do you work?" and they answer,
The local diner.
that would be difficult to incorporate into a package because it doesn't set any context. If this happens, ask them to restate their answer so that it incorporates the question. For example,
I work at the local diner.
don't let them refer to previous statements that they made or conversation that you had with them off camera.
I was walking down the street and I saw the car that I was talking to you about earlier.
You'll be using sound bites, not the entire conversation, and each soundbite needs to be able to stand on its own. Try to interview in a quiet location if possible, but also try to look for interesting imagery that could be used as background for the interview. A plain white wall is not as interesting of a background as a furnished room or the local neighborhood. Contrary to popular belief, you're not going to be able to write the story until you get all of the interviews and filming done. This is not only important to gather footage to show the viewer, but also to gather information to write the story. When you head back, you can transfer all of your footage, sort it on your computer, and look at it in more detail to help you figure out what you're going to write. You'll want to follow a basic formatting style when writing your packages. Your script will be broken up into sections: tracks, which you will narrate, your stand-up, which should already be filmed, and SOTS, which stand for Sound on Tape. SOTS are sound bites from the interviews that you've conducted. Your script should alternate between tracks and SOTS, with your stand-up placed somewhere in the mix. Generally speaking, tracks and SOTS should be 10 to 15 seconds each, and you shouldn't double up on either by placing two tracks or SOTS next to each other. There are exceptions, however, and your style may vary. Stand-ups can be placed pretty much anywhere in the package, but are best utilized to transition the story from one focus to another. Your story should be based around the SOTS, since you can't change what they say in the editing room. Choose SOTS that best represent what you want to convey, and write your tracks around them. Try to have your tracks lead into and out of your SOTS so that the whole story flows, but be sure not to repeat any information from your SOTS in your tracks. Make sure that you have B-roll that can serve as a visual aid for the information in your tracks. Your writing style should be short and sweet. Writing for television is a lot different than writing for a paper or online. Something that sounds intellectual and witty on paper usually ends up being wordy and hard to read when spoken. Try to convey your story in the fewest words possible. Your stand-up is generally filmed in the field before you write the rest of your story. Ideally, you should film it after you've conducted all of your interviews and shot all of your B-roll, so that you've gathered all of your information. When filming your stand-up, make sure you have a basic understanding of what you're going to write when you get back, or else it won't fit in with the rest of your clips and you'll have to reshoot it or go without it. Once you have your story written, you need to record it and edit all the clips together according to the script. Once you export it, you'll have a finished package. In the next video, we'll show you how to distribute and publicize your work,